It's 2023. It's 3 in the morning here in the United States. We've got new watch releases for the year thanks to Watches and Wonders. Let's go over some of the models that stood out to me that I've been able to research in this short period of time and talk about what Rolex has come out with, what Tudor's come out with, and a few of the others that I've noticed from other brands like Grand Seiko and Cartier. Let's start with the big dog first. Everyone's interested in the Rolex releases. I'm going to go through them and some of the things that they've changed or updated that made them different. The first is they're pushing the Rolex Daytona. They've redesigned actually a few things about it. Not only do they have a brand new movement in there with the caliber 4131, which is now has a cutout rotor, which mainly means that they now have a rotor that's easier to see through, which is important because on the Platinum Daytona, they are now offering it with a see-through caseback, which, as far as I can remember, I don't think there's very many, if any, model lines from Rolex that have a see-through caseback. They've usually just always had that standard sealed caseback. So the Rolex Daytona now has a see-through caseback, but only on the Platinum variant. The dial layout apparently has been changed, so you can see side by side here the old Rolex Daytona to the new Rolex Daytona. This does mean that the 40mm, the really popular, really expensive, resold Rolex Daytona is now technically discontinued, or the old model is technically discontinued. The newest model has a different dial layout, as you can see. It also has an edge around the surround of the ceramic bezel insert. So along that edge, as it meets the mid case, is now going to be a matching color metal. So if it's a gold Rolex Daytona, it will have a gold edge around that bezel. Lastly, the mid case apparently had a redesign as well. I can't see it because I don't have it in the metal. I couldn't tell if it's more flat, more like the GMT Masters or the Submariners, versus the Daytona always had a more of a curved side case. So not entirely sure what's different there. They also released the 1908. It's supposed to recognize Rolex's original heritage of the early 1900s and some of those watches and the early Oyster Perpetuals in its design and that edging on the bezel itself. It also does have a transparent caseback, which again is interesting, and it has a Siloxy hairspring, which I think we're going to see in a lot of Rolex models moving forward into the future. And it has what they call a dual clasp, which essentially looks like a butterfly clasp to me, but they obviously have their own name for it because the Rolex is what they do. The Rolex Explorer, one of my all-time favorite watches, now is offered in 40mm. This hasn't happened before. It was originally 36 for the longest time, then it was 39, then they discontinued the 39 to offer the 36 again, and now they have the 40 added to the 36. So the 36 itself has not been discontinued. It's the same as the 36, it's just bigger. There's no other updates that I can tell. It's just now 40mm, which for a lot of people I think are going to be really excited about a 40mm Explorer. It's going to fit their wrist a little bit better. Way too big for me in its overall design layout, but I recognize that there's a lot of people that like that and are going to be excited about this. The GMT Master 2 now has 2 new gold references. They're only sold on a Jubilee bracelet. There's one that's two-tone and one that's solid yellow gold. And they look like the GMT Master 2 as it would in a two-tone version. So there's not too much exciting there. It's Rolex doing something they know will probably sell. The YachtMaster 42 is now in titanium. Now this is the first standard issue watch. I would say standard issue. Rolex has only released one other titanium watch before this, and that was a deep sea special. It was a massive, gargantuan watch that they released late last year. And this is the first time they're releasing it in a more standard Rolex watch. So the YachtMaster 42 is now offered in grade 5 titanium, which there's a difference because grade 2 is what Tudor usually uses on most of their watches. Grade 5 is harder, and so it has a better job of keeping scratches off the watch itself. This watch does still retain the same satin finishing on the chamfers, on the lugs, which is nice to see back in a Rolex line. And it has the same polished, I wouldn't quite call it polished, but satin finish on the sides of the bracelet, as well as on the logo on the bracelet itself. But everywhere else, it seems to be a brushed finish, which makes sense with titanium. It's really hard to wear that stuff down to get that satin finish. So it's cool that they have it on there, but that's the first time I've seen that finishing from a Rolex/Tudor titanium watch. It also has ceramic inserts in the links of the bracelet, which is supposed to help it not age as much, where it stretches out over time. Should be interesting to see how that works. So now different Skydweller color variations. I couldn't see much different in terms of what's changed other than the colors themselves. I didn't see any other updates, but they do have new color variants, including a mint green option that they seem to be promoting. There's a new Oyster Perpetual model, which has basically what looks like balloons all over the dial, and it's supposed to represent all the different colors of Oyster Perpetuals that had come out. So all those really popular candy colored Oyster Perpetuals are now represented in one model. So that's kind of what that one is. The last thing from Rolex was the day date now has basically stone dials, which I think is actually quite neat and different. They've done this sort of thing in the past, but now they have different variants and they're a little bit more bold than something like a mother of pearl dial. So standard, and they know it will sell, and that's what they came out with there. The next brand we're going to talk about here is Tudor. Everyone watches Tudor's releases, and last year they were on a tear, so it's interesting to see what they came out with this year. First, they have the GMT with an opaline, I believe is what they called it, dial. It's a white dial GMT, so you have the same Pepsi style bezel, the burgundy and blue, and then in the center, instead of the black dial, you now have a white dial. Everything else remains the same, 41 millimeters, still the thick case, still the same movement, still the same everything. It's just a white dial. And I think it actually looks kind of cool, but not my cup of tea. I mean, I've seen some renderings of my Explorer 2 with a Pepsi bezel put on it, and I always thought it looked like a lot of color. So not actually my favorite release from them, but there will be a lot of people out there that want something like this and will like it. They're reintroducing a updated version of the original Black Bay line. So the Black Bay was obviously the name for everything within Tudor's catalog these days, but the original Black Bay was just a red bezeled dive watch, and it was 41 millimeters. They came out with it, and then they reintroduced that watch in the same burgundy bezel when they updated the movement. And now they're reintroducing it again, except this time it's going to have a METAS certified movement on the inside. So that's Tudor gunning for Omega right there, focusing on the METAS certification that Omega incorporates in all of their watches, almost, if not all of their watches. Tudor is going to be incorporating that into more of their watches. And there's a actual movement that has master chronometer written on the movement itself. It looks like the same movement that's used in all of Tudor's watches these days. But the Black Bay also comes with 3 different options for the bracelet: a rubber, a Jubilee, and an Oyster, and all of them come with T-fit. So that means you have 8 millimeters of on-the-fly adjustment, even on the rubber strap, or a Jubilee strap with that T-fit extension. So that's actually pretty cool and interesting. They're putting that T-fit on everything, it seems, this year. In the same vein, the Black Bay 31, 36, 39, 41, which is kind of their answer to the Explorer from Rolex, now has T-fit adjustments on all of them, as well as new dial colors. And that's basically the only variation you have on those. Tudor did release the Black Bay 54, which is essentially a Black Bay 58 with the bezel. Instead of being the gilded text on the bezel, they dropped that to a white, and then they downsized it to 37 millimeters. You'd have the Black Bay 54. There's very few other changes. It looks like it's the same profile of the 58. It's just downsized. It has the same gilt indices and general layout. The only difference is that the bezel itself, instead of being gilt as well as the indices being gilt, it's just gilt indices, but the bezel itself is muted. And I think this is mainly targeted towards women. I know my wife would be interested in a model like this, the sizing and obviously the press pictures. So I think that that's kind of the target demographic they're going at for this particular case size. While mid-size case dive watches have been popular in the past, they're typically not nearly as popular in the modern context. So I think they're mainly targeting women with that size, but that being said, I'm sure it will be popular. And lastly from Tudor, they updated some colored dials on the Royal, and that's it. From Tudor, nothing really that stood out as something I really need to buy, and no, there is no Pelagos 39 in blue or Pelagos 39 GMT or all the other things that people wanted. I think we might see something like that a little later in this year, but nothing for now. There were a couple other watches that stood out to me also that were released, and one is from Grand Seiko. They have a chronograph watch they released that looks like it's gunning for the Daytona or the Speedmaster or a lot of those classic chronograph watches that are really popular right now. This has the same ceramic bezel that you see on a lot of watches these days, as well as a really up-to-date and advanced movement for its kind. This, I think, will be one to watch. It'll be interesting to see how that pricing looks on the second hand as we move forward throughout the course of the year. Cartier updated the Tank Américain, which has a different dial layout. Instead of the guilloche pattern, they're going with more of a standard white dial without the same kind of engraving work. It's just going to have sort of a brush finish to it. It also has no small seconds hand. From Grand Seiko, you also have what looks like a white birch dial exploded onto the case. This is a handcrafted, hand-engraved Grand Seiko dress watch that looks like the white birch dial, and the case got the same white birch treatment of having those striations engraved throughout the entire case itself. IWC reintroduced the Ingenieur, and I think that is going to be a really popular and pushed model in the coming year. That's really going after the Gerald Genta inspired design that's popular these days with the Nautilus and the Royal Oak. And IWC's Ingenieur was originally, although it looked very different, involved with Gerald Genta. So I think that's going to be popular and promoted by IWC this coming year. Patek Phillipe also released the Calatrava in 3 colorful different variants, which I thought was interesting as well. These are just some of the watch releases from Watches and Wonders in 2023. This is the first day of the event, but some of the big releases have been noticed. But these are some of the big releases, so I wanted to talk about them, get some news and information out there in video form so you don't have to read article after article. And if you have any questions or comments, thoughts down below, leave them there. Do me a favor and subscribe, please. It does help. There's a reason why I'm waking up at 3 a.m. in the morning, so if you want to subscribe, I appreciate that. I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care.